Atlético de Madrid has a problem, and it's not Barça nor Deco, not even the 100 million euros offered by the Barça side. The real problem for Atlético de Madrid is called Julián Álvarez.
I take responsibility for what I say, and I say it with complete certainty about what I feel and know, because if not, I wouldn't say it. And I see it as very difficult, almost impossible, very difficult for Julián Álvarez to keep playing for Atlético de Madrid next season.
Because for the first time since this whole story began, he's starting to accept something that just a few weeks ago seemed impossible. That Julián might want to leave Atlético. And be careful, because this absolutely changes everything about the deal. Because it's one thing to reject an offer, which is easy, and it's a whole different thing to convince your star to stay when that same star has already made a decision. And this is where the most important information from the last few hours starts to come in. Because while from Madrid they keep saying that Julián is not for sale, in the words of their president, Enrique Cerezo, trying to tone down, of course, the euphoria of Barcelona fans. And while some are also trying to ridicule that Barça offer, just look at Atlético de Madrid's own Twitter account. From Argentina, mind you, from Argentina. They tell us a story that fits perfectly and completely complements the news we had a few days ago. And the thing is, the story makes Atlético de Madrid very nervous, and it all makes sense.
In Julián's circle, a move to Barcelona is probably the priority, even if they make smaller offers than Paris Saint-Germain.
Because Fabrizio Romano confirmed the offer. Gastón Edul, the famous Argentine journalist who closely follows the Albiceleste national team, talks about a situation that is very difficult to turn around. And Verónica Brunati goes even further. Let's get right into the news because it's very important, and I repeat, it comes from sources very close to Julián and from people around the Argentina national team. I'll tell you everything because all three agree on something. Fabrizio Romano, Gastón Edul, and Verónica Brunati. They both agree that Barça and Julián Álvarez are already speaking the same language. That is to say, when the player and the club are on the same page, that's when the real problems start for the selling club. Because from this moment on, the question is no longer what fee Atlético de Madrid wants, reportedly 150 million euros. But here the question is different. Can Atlético de Madrid really keep a player who only thinks about wearing the Blaugrana shirt? Because what has happened in the last few hours is much more important than it seems. And I'm going to explain why. Because for weeks, the story was very simple. Barça wanted to sign Julián. Atlético de Madrid said it was impossible. And it seemed like they wanted to close the chapter and end the whole story about a possible signing. Well, the story has changed. Because now we're not just talking about Barça's interest. We're talking about a total agreement with his camp and with the player. What I'm telling you now is completely different from just a club simply being interested in a player. Here, sources in Argentina confirm it. According to Gastón Edul and Verónica Brunati, Julián does have agreements and is indeed interested in wearing the Blaugrana shirt. Because many fans have focused only on that first offer of 100 million euros. Whether it's enough, whether Atlético de Madrid will accept it or not, and if there will be a second offer. But within Barça, they believe there's something much more important than all of that. And that's what matters most. The player's desire. The player's desire. The Argentine star's desire. Because all of this, which both Gastón Edul and Verónica Brunati confirm, is clear. Julián wants to play for Barça. And this brings us to the first big twist in the story of this signing for FC Barcelona, because when the player starts to see himself at another club, everything changes. The negotiation changes, the pressure changes, the agent's stance changes. Let me remind you that a week ago, less than a week ago, there was a meeting, or rather two meetings, about Julián Álvarez, right? The first one was to have an initial meeting with Julián's representative. An intermediary was involved in that meeting, Juanma López. And Barça knows very well what it has to do. I think Deco has lost a lot over these years. and he knows how to carry out this operation. We don't want what happened with Nico Willian to happen again. Nico Willian didn't want to wait for Barça. Julián is desperate to join Barça. We'll see if it happens or not, but that's the key. Julián needs to push hard to leave the red and white club. From there, he'll definitely be a Barça player, folks. Trust me, that's why Barça is moving so quickly. And that's why Laporta is so personally involved in this deal. But wait, because here comes some new information that might surprise a lot of people. Because Barça wasn't expecting such a tough response from Atlético de Madrid. Not so quick, not so forceful, not so public. And the thing is, from the Atlético side, they've sent a very clear message. Julián is not for sale. Or at least not at the price that Barça is offering. The figures we've already mentioned in this video. From Madrid, they're talking about 150 million euros. According to reports, if that amount isn't put on the table, they won't even sit down. An amount that is obviously very high. But here comes a key question. Is Atlético de Madrid really trying to sell the player, or are they just trying to buy time? Because within Barça, there are those who think that those 150 million euros have a very specific purpose. To scare off buyers, to create fear, and to publicly reinforce the idea that Julián is untouchable. But who actually believes this? Listen up, because this is where one of the men I mentioned at the beginning of this video comes into play. Go ahead and hit the like button because this is incredible. What a story I'm telling you. Gastón Edul, a journalist who covers the Argentina national team, what he says is tremendous. It's very interesting. In the last few hours, he has spoken about something very important in the Julián Álvarez deal. Inside Barça, this has been very well received. Because he sees it as very difficult for Atlético de Madrid to keep Julián if his desire as a player is to leave that Madrid club. And watch out, because here is the key to the operation. It's no longer about the 100 million or the 150 million. It's not Fabrizio Romano, Laporta, or Simeone anymore. It's Julián, folks. When a player isn't happy and wants a change of scenery, no matter how much of a contract he has, no matter how much pressure there is from the club he belongs to, if the player doesn't want to, it changes everything completely. And I want Barcelona fans to hold on to this very important argument, which is completely real. Here, we don't want to deceive anyone. This is information that comes out and we're telling you about it. This is what the architect says. I repeat, Gastón Edul. He sees it as practically impossible for Julián to stay one more year wearing the red and white jersey. What does Julián want to do? Well, according to this latest information, it seems increasingly clear that he doesn't want to continue playing for Atlético de Madrid. And Verónica Brunati, the other main character in this story, is probably one of the Argentine journalists with the best sources when it comes to players from the national team. She reports and says almost exactly the same thing as Gastón Edul. Total agreement between Barça and the player. Total, but no agreement between the clubs. And it's really important to understand this, because it means that Barça has already completed the first half of the job. Often the most complicated part. Convincing the player is not easy, but now comes the second part, convincing Atlético de Madrid, and that battle could be much longer than we imagined. In fact, there's a scenario that's starting to worry people inside the club, and that's the World Cup. Because Barça wanted to close the deal as soon as possible. That is right now, before Julián joined up with Argentina. Before the tournament starts. Before his market value could increase even more. But right now, that possibility is starting to get complicated. Because if Atlético maintains their stance, and Barça maintains theirs, this could drag out the whole operation for weeks, even months. And that's where Barça's biggest fear comes in. Because imagine for a moment that Julián has a spectacular World Cup. Imagine he scores a lot of goals, that he leads Argentina alongside Leo Messi. Imagine he becomes one of the stars of the World Cup. What will happen next? Well, precisely, that big question. That's the one they're asking in the offices at Camp Barça. Will Barça be able to get a clear answer from Atlético de Madrid before the summer is over? I mean, Is this deal gonna be closed not long after the end of the World Cup? But here's another detail that I think is key. And it's how calmly Barça is moving. In these early stages of the transfer market, which hasn't actually even opened yet, not until June 30th. Because if anything has been proven up to this point, it's that Barça isn't improvising anything. There's a plan. First, Anthony Gordon appeared, closed in a matter of hours, then Bernardo Silva with a full agreement already in place. And in a matter of hours, he will also officially be a Barça player. And now we're still talking about Julián Álvarez, because there's a plan, there's a roadmap. And that's precisely what excites Barça fans the most. Because for the first time in a long time, it seems that Barça isn't just reacting. It seems that Barça is leading. And that completely changes the perception of the transfer market. Because there's a definitive question. The question that will define the whole summer. Will Atlético de Madrid finally agree to negotiate with Barcelona? Because it's one thing to publicly say no. And it's a very different thing to maintain that stance for 2 months. Especially if the player still feels the same way. Which is to play for Barça. That's why I'm telling you, this has only just begun. And I have a feeling that we still haven't seen the most important chapters of this story. Because Fabrizio Romano confirms the offer. Gastón Edul makes it clear that keeping Julián will be practically impossible. And Verónica Brunati talks about an agreement between Barça and the player. But obviously, everyone agrees that Atlético de Madrid doesn't want to sell the footballer. Therefore, Atlético de Madrid's own behavior shows concern. What happened the other day, publishing that they were going to sign Lamine Yamal, Pedri and Rafinha, is shameful. And it shows that they are super nervous. They don't know where to hide. And Barça has already achieved something that seemed impossible a couple of weeks ago. Convincing Julián. And when a global star wants to wear your jersey, things usually work out. Sooner or later, with more or less difficulty, it will happen. That's why this saga is far from over. In fact, I have the feeling, unless there's a radical turn of events, that until the World Cup is over, we won't know what will happen with Julián Álvarez. The battle has only just begun. Because Atlético de Madrid is putting up resistance. The World Cup is just around the corner, and Julián still has one thing on his mind. It's to play for Barça. And my friends, that changes absolutely everything. Do you think Julián will end up joining Barcelona? Yes or no? Let me know in the comments. Type in the chat, Julián to Barça. Hit the like button, subscribe, and I'll see you at the World Cup. Share this video. Barça yesterday, Barça today, Barça forever.